Welcome everyone to today's webinar, How to Build a Strategic Supply Chain Model. I am Molly Gamble with Becker's Hospital Review. Before we begin, I'm going to walk through a few quick housekeeping instructions. We'll begin today's webinar with a presentation and have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. We'll also have a series of poll questions during today's webinar. You can submit the answer that best applies to you directly on your screen in the slides box. Thank you in advance for your participation. Today's session is being recorded and will be made available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log in today's webinar to access that recording. And if at any time you don't see your slides moving or have trouble with your audio, try refreshing your browser. You can also submit any technical questions into the Q&A box. We are here to help. With that, I am pleased to welcome today's speakers. Our presenters today are Paul Farnan from Cardinal Health and Elizabeth Hilla from the Health Industry Distributors Association, otherwise known as HIDA. Paul Farnan is the Director of Supply Chain Solutions for Cardinal Health. He's responsible for new business development and leadership of the company's supply chain solutions service offerings. Paul has more than 30 years of experience providing leadership to hospitals and healthcare systems. Elizabeth Hilla is HIDA's Senior Vice President. She has been with HIDA for 34 years and oversees communications, education, research, and industry affairs. Paul, Elizabeth, welcome. I'll turn the floor over to you now to share some more background about your organizations and yourself. So Paul, let's start with you.
Hey, thanks, Molly, and welcome everyone. Real briefly, Cardinal's recognized as a leader in transforming the healthcare supply chain for hospitals and health systems nationwide. Cardinal provides medical supplies and services to more than 85% of U.S. hospitals. We've been ranked by Gartner as one of the top 5 companies in supply chain excellence for 10 consecutive years. Just recently, Cardinal was honored to be named as a healthcare supply chain master for the 3rd consecutive year. And we have our, partner hospitals and providers to thank for that. The collaboration we have with them allow us to be successful in this mission. Elizabeth, would you tell us a little bit about HIDA?
Yeah, sure, Paul, and thank you for inviting me to join you on this webinar. It's an honor. So the Health Industry Distributors Association is the nonprofit trade association representing the country's medical product distributors. So we have 90-some members, distributors, including large national distributors, independents, specialty companies. It really spans the range and the country, and even some international distributors. Our members serve hospitals. Many of them also serve nursing homes. We have laboratory distributors, home care, physician, really across the healthcare markets. And we also have participation from more than 120 associate member companies. A whole lot of them are medical product manufacturers. We also have GPOs, technology companies. So we have the benefit of perspective from across the supply chain.
Perfect. Thank you, Elizabeth and Paul. So now we will focus on our webinar objectives. Today's webinar will focus on 4 main objectives. First, our speakers will define what a strategic supply chain model is, and then explain some of the key benefits of integrating different solutions into one cohesive model. Next, we'll share key steps health systems can follow to build their own strategic model and touch on how to add preparedness into that model. And then last, the webinar will conclude with the practical resources for health systems ready to take the next step in their journey toward a strategic supply chain model. So Paul and Elizabeth, as we get started here today, my first question for you is, how would you define a strategic supply chain model? Paul, can I turn to you first?
Yeah, well, Molly, probably a lot of people on the phone, including myself, probably aren't feeling very strategic these days. But let's face it, COVID has kind of changed everything, but probably makes this topic all the more important. So in terms of what is a strategic supply chain model, most hospitals have a supply chain strategy, one that they've worked to define and refine. But the question is, what makes it strategic? And that's where we feel that going beyond a traditional or typical supply chain model, what makes it strategic is incorporating in sort of the long-term goals and vision of your health system. So having alignment there where your supply chain strategy clearly matches and supports both the short-term and long-term goals and visions of your health system. That could be something around the area of patient safety or your patient experience, cost savings, innovation, quality. Those might be tenets of a vision or strategy that you would want to echo or enforce in your supply chain strategy. So if we look at, in a practical sense, how a supply chain strategy comes together, it's really looking at some of the cross-functional elements of a supply chain within your IDN or health system today. And that usually begins by looking at functional areas like sourcing and contracting, distribution and product storage, logistics and transportation, data and technology. There are certainly other facets and constituents within a typical supply chain to incorporate into this strategy and into this model. The goal here is not to operate in silos, which can be very easy to do, but looking at your supply chain and your health system in a holistic way that includes input from clinical staff as well as operational teams, having a focus on both cost and quality, understanding what your resources and limitations are with technology, and going beyond just the four walls of the acute care hospital. What makes up your supply chain across your IDN, whether it's your non-acute physician offices, your surgery centers, and relationships you may have with other constituents like your GPO, distributors, manufacturers. These could all be elements of your broader model. Elizabeth, let me turn it over to you for your thoughts on kind of that definition of a strategic supply chain model.
I think that's a really good definition. I wasn't going to try to add to the definition, but maybe just a little perspective that I think supply chain has become more strategic over the years, long before COVID. I really have seen healthcare systems recognizing the strategic importance of the supply chain. I mean, it's something we've been talking about for a long time. It's been the joke that purchasing was always down in the basement of the hospital, right? They were purchasing, they were procurement. And I'm sure that's true in some places, but in a lot of health systems, the supply chain officer is a C-suite position. And that means that that organization recognizes that supply chain is one of the most critical functions to the organization. And they're recognizing, really interesting thing, that the supply chain leaders bring this expertise, and it can be applied not just to med-surg supplies that supply chain kind of traditionally focused on, or materials management traditionally focused on, but that they can take that expertise to physician preference items, to purchase services, even lab and pharmacy. So we've seen the level of supply chain moving up, and we've seen the breadth of responsibility for the supply chain officer, the supply chain department expanding. But of course, if you're going to be that strategic department, play that strategic role in the organization, then you have to have a strategy. You have to have a model that's been built to your strategy, and you have to have strategic partners with your vendors, strategic partnerships with your vendors.
Absolutely. Well, gang, we're going to open it up here and get some audience participation, if you will. So we've got a couple polling questions for you. So get your mouses ready. I'm going to read the question and the answers out loud to you, and then feel free to go ahead and click on the answer or answers that you think best fit your response. So let me start with polling question number 1. Which of the following elements are key parts of your supply chain strategy? You're allowed to select multiple answers here. So option A, procurement and contracting solutions That might be, for example, some technology or part of your MMIS system. Answer B, inventory management solution. That could be some type of handheld technology, barcode, two-bin Kanban, etc. Answer C, transportation solution. This could be some form of freight management or transportation network that you have established. Option D, logistics solution. A couple examples there might be a consolidated service center, a low unit of measure program, a 3PL program. Option E, product standardization initiatives. Go ahead and submit your answers. I'll give you a couple minutes and allow our system here to tabulate the responses. And get ready because I'll have a poll question number 2 coming up for you shortly. All right, here's your responses showing up, and we can see that we've got a couple of interesting responses here and some, I think, some common responses, which is really interesting and helpful. Hey, let's go on to poll question number 2 because I think these are going to be related. Let me go ahead and read again the question and then your 3 choices on poll question number 2. So poll question number 2 is, are these solutions integrated at your health system? Choose one of the following answers. Option A, the solutions stand alone and are rarely, if ever, overlapping. Option B, by nature of the solutions, they are somewhat integrated, but could be part of a more strategic model. Or option C, they're fully integrated into one strategic model. If you'd provide your answers to polling question number 2, please. All right, a little bit more of a disparate answers here. Looking like somewhat integrated seems to be the common response here. Molly, let me turn it back to you. Thanks everyone for their input on these poll questions.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks attendees for entering those responses, like Paul said. So Paul and Elizabeth, now that you've described and defined what a strategic supply chain model is, Paul, you noted that whether a facility is focused on cost savings or more innovative medical products to new departments, strategic really does mean something different for each facility. And then Elizabeth, really appreciate the comment that health systems, even pre-pandemic, were getting more strategic about their supply chains for a while now, as seen with the C-level, the elevation and greater visibility of supply C-level executives in IDNs. I'm hoping now to understand, and hopefully you can tell us more about what benefits are there in integrating more than one supply chain solution. We just saw from attendees that the majority of them say their solutions are somewhat integrated. Paul, can you kick us off and tell us more about the benefits from further integration?
Yeah, let me try to speak to that. Obviously, a holistic process is the goal here. As I mentioned before, trying to avoid the swim lanes, the silos, whatever you want to call them. A strategic supply chain, should not be done in isolation, but in a cross-functional way. I think one of the benefits of integrating is looking at how some of the solutions or some of the constituents might have aspects of the project that might involve sequencing. In other words, implementing one part of the project in advance of another part and how they may complement one another. There's obviously some benefits associated with productivity. Just understanding the complete solution can help all the members of the team understand how the components add up to the sum of the parts. The resource efficiency, what comes to mind for me within most health systems are any type of finance support or systems, IT support you might need, and getting that integrated game plan in front of some of those support functions certainly drives efficiency. And lastly, I'd mention some level of risk mitigation, that having an integrated plan should reduce or eliminate risk, as opposed to, again, operating in silos and not seeing the bigger picture. Elizabeth, what would you add to that?
Paul, you know, it's interesting if you think about, like, what's a strategic leader? If you're strategic, you've got the big picture, right? You're looking ahead, you're putting all the parts together. It doesn't mean that you have, like, 10 little pictures. It means you really get the big picture. And so clearly we need that from our systems, all the different projects that we're managing. But in healthcare, really, pretty much every organization, we tend to fall into those silos and to work in silos. In healthcare, I hear it all the time. Oh, the purchasing people, they're only looking at price. I mean, in some cases, they're actually incentivized to take, their performance evaluation at the end of the year is how many pennies off of the price did they take? Well, were they given the information to understand, you know, the impact of that purchase choice that they're making, not just on the pennies on the price, but on logistics costs, how much it costs to hold the product, or the freight cost to get it in, or all of those kinds of things. And I think also we see that there's silos between organizations. If we really want to get strategic, we need to integrate our information, or at least share information between organizations. The big watchword right now with COVID is visibility. Health system leaders are saying, I need visibility to what's going to be available or maybe not going to be available from my suppliers. The suppliers are saying, we're going to do a whole lot better job if we have visibility to your demand, what you think is coming down the pike tomorrow, next week, next month. So visibility is the big thing, and it sounds really good. I've heard it on every webinar I've been on. But to do it, first of all, we got to get willing to do it. We got to be willing to share our information. We've got to create the kind of trusted partnerships with our distributor, with our other supplier, that we're willing to share our demand information if we're a health system, that we're willing to share supply information if we're a vendor. But we also have to have the systems that can talk to each other to gather and share this data. And I don't think that can be just the MMIS or just the something else. We really have to go a level up.
Perfect. Thanks, Elizabeth. I think that response really paints a really textured picture of so many of the pain points and challenges health systems are facing in not becoming more strategic in terms of roadblocks. But let's talk about that a little bit. I think for attendees with us today, what are some key elements health systems should really consider when they are building a more cohesive, more strategic supply chain model? Paul, can I turn to you first?
Yeah, Molly, let me recommend 4 steps. One we've touched upon, and that's alignment. Again, your supply chain strategy needs to be complementary to your health system's vision or mission. So, for example, if patient safety is the number 1 priority, how does your supply chain reinforce or support that goal? Number 2, I would say, is executive sponsorship. I do believe that most successful initiatives, certainly integrated strategies like this one, start at the top of the house. So as a supply chain leader, having your COO, CEO endorse an integrated strategic model would be a great place to start. Thirdly, the idea of cross-functional teams. So collaborating with your clinical staff, other key constituents across your health system, so that you've got a lot of input, you've got a lot of checkpoints to complement and inform your strategic model. And then the 4th one, I'd say something around measurement. Whether you refer to it as KPIs, key performance indicators, but some kind of regular checkpoint where you're monitoring your progress, measuring your results, so that you are on target and can adjust or modify your plan as needed. Elizabeth, can I ask you to add to that?
Yeah, and again, I'm going to probably add from the same perspective that I was speaking from before, which is that strategic model, to really be strategic, needs to extend beyond the individual organization, the IDN, the hospital, the health system. So the other piece that it's got to include is strategic partnerships with trusted suppliers. Because if we say we want to build a strategic supply chain model, but we're still in that kind of old days mindset that the vendors are adversaries, we have to negotiate them down, we have to get on the opposite side of the table and really, get the best deal. I think that makes it really hard to get strategic. I mean, I think those conversations, they have to be about more than price. They have to really sit down and talk about, here's where we're trying to go as a health system. What are you trying to do as a manufacturer, distributor, and how do we align our objectives so that we can go there together? I would think the first I'm guessing everybody on the line has those kinds of conversations. I sure hope so. I hope that they'd start with your distributor if you have a prime vendor distributor, because typically that's your most important trusted trading partner. But you got to have those conversations with more than a few key manufacturers, I think, if you're really going to build a strategic model.
Terrific. So really 5 considerations there overall. We have from Paul, alignment, executive sponsorship, building a cross-functional, multidisciplinary team, ensuring you have those meaningful, actionable KPIs, and then Elizabeth, making sure you have strategic partnerships with trusted suppliers, like you said. Let's talk too about preparedness. How can health systems add preparedness elements into these strategic models?
Paul, Molly, that's probably the million dollar question right now, right? This is on everyone's mind, and a lot of people are working very specifically on this topic. So thanks for the great question. I'll start with, the old adage of the 4 Ps. Proper planning prevents poor performance. So having a plan is, job one. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if you do have a plan, what modifications do you need to make? And I think a lot of folks, including Cardinal, are in that boat right now of, given the circumstances, what adjustments and what enhancements do we need to make to our preparedness plans? Supply disruption, product availability has been the greatest challenge for everyone in the industry and our strategic plans right now. So one of the things we're doing and encouraging all of our provider partners to do is to look at strategic partnerships. Like Elizabeth mentioned, there are some really great minds out there, whether it be your distributor, your GPO, some of your manufacturers who are quickly bringing to the table new tools, new ideas, new models to help with preparedness. So we'll speak to some of these in the wrap-up, but I know Cardinal and other vendors are bringing forward some supply chain visibility tools that could be very valuable as we navigate the next several months together. We are seeing new models out there. The idea of customers doing some type of self-warehousing or consolidated service centers where they're looking to be less dependent on certain products or certain vendors and take more control of their supply chain by having customer-owned inventory on hand in excess of their normal par levels or in excess of their normal days inventory on hand. I think it's clear, though, that we would all agree that it's not just one party's responsibility to build in this resiliency in the supply chain. And I would challenge all of us to work across and up and down the supply chain, whether you are a manufacturer, a distributor, a provider, or a GPO. Everybody has a role here in focusing on inventory availability and supply chain resiliency. So those are some thoughts that come to mind for me as we talk about adding in an element of preparedness to your supply chain strategy. Elizabeth, what are your thoughts around preparedness?
God, if you get me started, Paul, you might regret it, because preparedness it is something we've been working on at HIDA since long before COVID. We actually have a legislation proposed now, but it's work that it reflects ideas that we have been advancing long before the pandemic actually hit. So we really have some strong opinions about building preparedness into the supply chain, kind of beyond individual organizations, the whole supply chain. One of the things that the experts tell us is it's really important to keep having those conversations beyond just dealing with what we're in the middle of right now, because this pandemic, it doesn't make us immune from the possibility of another one. Maybe the next one is an influenza epidemic or some Ebola, whatever. So one thing that we've known for a long time is that there needs to be more inventory cushion in the supply chain. I think because there hasn't been enough inventory cushion, and what we saw, people keep saying the supply chain was broken by the pandemic. I like the metaphor a lot better, that the faucet worked fine, but the well ran dry, right? There was no water to come out the faucet. So if we want to put more inventory in, we need to do it at many levels. It doesn't have to be at your facility, although it might be, but distributors are willing to work with you on options like sequestered customer-owned inventory. We'd like to see it all around the country managed by distributors so that inventory doesn't just sit and expire at the local level. And we've also been working with the government to increase levels in the strategic national stockpile, the state stockpiles, and I think you're going to see those things happening. I also think we need to do scenario planning beyond what we're experiencing today, because the next crisis might require a different group of products, and we really need to think through what we might need to be prepared for in the future. And if I can, I realize I'm going on, but one other thing that we're concerned about is that everybody is working to build up big stockpiles right now, and that makes sense, but it seems to make sense. I think it is a little bit of a less than strategic approach, because right now there are nursing homes, hospitals, first responders that still can't get products. So when I hear about organizations that are holding or trying to build up, say, 6 months of PPE supply, my personal concern is that those products are needed on the front lines right now, not the back shelves. So we need some sort of a moderation, more cooperation to make sure that we're managing the available amount of supply as well as possible.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm glad we could talk a bit about preparedness today. I'm sure for our attendees with us, it is a number one and core concern for everyone. So thank you both. And, Paul, you had mentioned some of the ways I think all of us have seen how health systems have innovated over the past several months. I'm hoping you can just expand upon and share some more examples of innovations you've seen within health system supply chains.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of innovation going on right now, so I won't claim to capture all of it, but let me maybe offer a few observations. I always like to start with data. To me, right now, a lot of health systems are really moving aggressively in the direction of information technology and data and analytics, so I really think that's a great place to drive innovation, whether it's data sharing, demand planning, artificial intelligence, just understanding your own demand patterns and data trending offers a huge world of opportunity in the healthcare supply chain. So I love the work going on there. We mentioned some of the advances in supply chain and inventory visibility. So those are another example of sort of data sharing. This concept of either self-distribution or another layer of local inventory for hospitals. Hospitals have their par levels on their nursing units. They have maybe a storeroom. They have their distributors, their manufacturers. But given our world today and the challenges of PPE, we have certainly seen innovation around do-it-yourselfers, hospitals who've been forced to stand up warehouses and build PPE distribution networks within their health systems. So that's certainly been a form of innovation. We're also challenging or encouraging hospitals to look at more of a logical unit of measure program. The industry for years has been focused on just-in-time inventory or low unit of measure, but we think there's a moderate approach here around logical unit of measure, and that's not always ordering in the lowest unit, but ordering in a unit of measure that is more in line with your historical demand. So it's another, I'll say, twist on an old theme, but an important innovation to consider as we go forward. Elizabeth, I know you have some visibility here around innovation in the industry as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of facilities out there that don't necessarily want to, they want to make sure there's more inventory available to them, but they don't necessarily want to own the facilities or store, football fields worth of PPE or whatever the products are. So we know there's a lot of discussions going on between health systems and their distributors about, can I have a certain amount of space in your warehouse for inventory that I own? Can you serve as a 3PL for me? Or the older term, I think, is the sequestered inventory for specific scenarios. So that the inventory is close by, available to you, but it's not taking up space in your facility.
Terrific. Well, like Paul said, a lot of innovation happening, but it's always helpful to hear from both of you and understand from your perspective just a few of the examples and what you're seeing. So as we wind down here, we promised in our objectives we would share with attendees some practical steps for health systems to use in building their own model. So how about we discuss this? Paul, can I ask you to start us off about some practical resources they can consider or should know about?
Yeah, we definitely have some tools and some best demonstrated practices. As Cardinal's worked across many different health systems, we've tried to create some almost a library of resources to make available to our customers. So one example is we have something called a supply chain excellence model. And we looked at supply chains across the country and started to see some common success factors and some common, I'll call them metrics, almost best demonstrated practices that we started to document. And we call it a supply chain excellence model because it starts with sort of good fundamentals. And then we've started to highlight sort of advanced practices, kind of that PhD level of supply chain, and call out some of those best demonstrated practices as almost like a model or cookbook for supply chain leaders to compare and contrast. There's not one perfect supply chain model out there, but we think this supply chain excellence model gives you almost a menu to choose from or compare your health system to other successful health systems and supply chains. So that's number one. Number two is we do also have a pretty robust set of data and analytics that we can share with providers around benchmarking. So again, looking at some of the best demonstrated practices in supply chain, whether you'd like to compare one hospital within your health system to another one, or compare your health system to a similar health system, we've got some data that would give you benchmarking to let you know almost, from a percentile standpoint, where do you rank in comparison to your peers in some of the key supply chain metrics. That would be another tool we could offer folks listening today. As well as I'll wrap up with the idea of kind of a supply chain assessment. That's one of the key roles our team plays we are happy to come on site and help you do a bit of an audit or review of your current supply chain. We do a walkthrough, we call it a dock to stock, starting at your receiving dock, following your supply chain from put away to distribution to replenishment, and offering you some observations and recommendations on what you're doing well, and some data and some best demonstrated practices around some opportunities. So those are some resources that Cardinal certainly makes available to our customers today. Elizabeth, what comes to mind to you in terms of other resources that might help the audience today?
So it's interesting, we're a distributor trade association, so a lot of the things that we do are to help our distributor members, but lately so many of the issues we've all been facing the same ones, too much demand for certain products, too little supply, what's ahead. So we've created an Understanding Healthcare Distribution page on our website with free resources that explain some of the just challenges that we face, allocations, the glove shortage, the shipping, that's the new shortage, is the not enough shipping capacity to bring products in right now, things like that. So we've got information on some industry issues. We also really closely track what's happening on the government affairs side. So if you're looking to understand what's happening as we try to build a stronger national model to be more prepared, and the strategic national stockpile, all of that.
Awesome. Hey, let me try to bring us to a little bit of a summary here in some of the key points I think we touched on. And, as you guys look at sort of taking the information you heard today back into your institutions, your facilities, back into your health systems, here I think are maybe some of the key points today. First, define what strategic means for your health system. As we talked about, your goals, your objectives are unique, and make sure that your senior leadership, your supply chain leadership has some clear definition around what strategic means for your health system. Second, I think it's important to have a clear objective around what you're looking to do to improve your supply chain over what you're doing today. So as I mentioned, having a plan is important, but going back now and improving the plan, enhancing the plan, taking some of our lessons learned over the last 6 to 8 months is probably timely right now to update or improve upon what maybe was your original model. Next, I'd suggest, executing your plan. That includes the executive sponsorship we talked about, drawing upon your cross-functional teams, the key performance indicators or measurement steps that we talked about, making sure that that plan becomes part of your daily routine and operating procedure. Fourth, I think, spent some important time today about adding that element of resiliency to your supply chain, emergency preparedness, whatever you want to call it. Make sure that whatever the future holds, that your supply chain strategy and your model has that element to your plan. Finally, I'd say don't rest. Don't stop there. This is an evolution. It's a living and breathing animal that needs to be watered and maintained. So continue to sprinkle in enhancements and innovation into your supply chain strategy and the models that you build. Keep moving them forward. We are in a very fast industry and world of change, and updating your model, enhancing your model makes nothing but sense now more than ever.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Paul and Elizabeth, and thanks to all of our attendees for your attention today. Please do take a moment to complete the survey on your screen. Your feedback is vital in helping us continually improve the value you receive from discussions like this one. And we're happy now to begin today's attendee question and answer session. So please submit any questions you have by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your dashboard. And we'll try and get through as many of these questions as we can today. So Paul and Elizabeth, some questions have rolled in while you were speaking. Let me pull those up here. So this first question is from an attendee, and Paul, you just shared the 5 summaries of guidance for hospitals to get started in this initiative. This attendee is from a smaller organization, and the question is, for a small hospital, where would you advise begin in building supply chain strategy? Are there any caveats or special considerations you'd like to share for smaller hospitals?
Wow, interesting question. Where I'd start is as close to the patient as possible. So I always believe that you build your supply chain from the patient backwards. So looking at where your inventory is today, understanding the needs of your staff, your clinicians, beginning with sort of those par levels. Maybe you have some type of storage limitations or point of use technology, but understanding how to meet those daily service requirements of your staff and your patients, to me, is always the best place to start, regardless of the size of your hospital. That's, to me, where the rubber meets the road. And then as you build backwards, back to your hospital storeroom, back into your materials management system, back into your inventory and sourcing strategies, they are all informed by that focus at the patient and the supplies your staff needs. So that's where I'd encourage anyone to start, especially small hospitals.
Paul, I would throw in, God bless this person for asking, because I think at a small hospital, it's harder, right? You got a smaller supply chain staff, and in some ways, bigger challenges. So like right now with all of the shortages, sometimes it's the small organizations, unfortunately, the smaller providers that get the short end of the stick. And so thinking strategically just makes a ton of sense. I would say definitely have those conversations with whoever your most trusted partners are, if it's your distributor, your GPO, some of your major manufacturers, so that they understand what you're trying to do, help you identify issues, opportunities, all of that.
Yeah, great idea.
Perfect. Thank you both. And thanks again to the attendee for the questions. We could tailor some advice for the institution size. This next question is, what are your thoughts on analyzing supplier risk in the supply chain? Paul, can I turn to you first for reactions to that question?
Yeah, I might need a little bit more detail on that one if folks want to follow up with me separately with some specifics. But ascertaining risk with any supplier or vendor is certainly part of any good sourcing and contracting process. And risk, I guess, can take on many forms. That's why I hesitate in trying to give you a specific answer on this. But I know right now a lot of hospitals are experiencing or having bad experiences with new products, new vendors, sort of non-traditional supplies, if you will, that have created a lot of risk around the efficacy, the quality, the usefulness of those products. So that's where my head goes first. A lot of great companies out there have very rigorous quality and regulatory programs that ultimately protect you and your staff and your patients. So those sort of tried and true companies you've done business with in the past have some of those protections in place. And as you have to or are forced to go outside your traditional network, there is inherent risk. I think just doing your regular due diligence, doing your regular contracting routine is probably the best you can do right now. Elizabeth, I don't know if you have any creative suggestions there.
What you just said, I've heard a million times. I mean, I've heard distributor people, health system people all talking about how right now with the major shortages that they went out looking for products and all of the bad experiences, and it's mostly been bad experiences that people have had, trying to grab product from sketchy suppliers and that sort of thing, because there just wasn't enough inventory, really available globally. So yes, all the things that people have been doing lately have introduced risk, understandably so. People needed product. On a getting away from that more immediate part, I mean, clearly there is risk in the healthcare supply chain, and that we've discovered since COVID, because I don't think any of us really realized how geographically concentrated a lot of the manufacturing is. So I think the proposals, not necessarily to just, everything has to be buy American, but to diversify the countries that we buy from and the companies that we buy from. I think that makes sense. I think having pre-established substitution products, subs for the subs in case of shortages, all of those good things are good ways to mitigate risk. And there are some tools out there to kind of look at, the visibility of hurricanes and other things and what's affecting what factory. But I think there are simpler things that we can do in the meantime.
Yep.
Thank you both for your thoughtful response to that question. This next question is about KPIs, which we had discussed a little bit earlier in the presentation. The attendee would like to know, do you have recommendations for KPIs? I understand they'll vary by contract, but do you suggest a resource with good examples for use in developing KPIs?
Yeah, this is Paul. I'll start. I do think that supply chain excellence model I referenced earlier has some of those KPIs in there. It could be some measurements around fill rates. We have some ratios around cost per adjusted patient day. We have ratios around dollars per order line, numbers of order lines, taking some criteria around how you service your units in your hospital and sort of backtracking that back to your manufacturer or your distributor so that you're setting yourself up to succeed. That's where some of those KPIs, some of those metrics help you understand your sort of relative performance to other hospitals and where you might have some areas of opportunity. So I'd aim you at that supply chain excellence model to see some of those metrics or comparables.
Paul, I'm definitely not a KPI expert. I was curious, do people have a way to measure like if or how often a procedure actually gets delayed because the product isn't there? Because that seems like that would be where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, that's a great one, Elizabeth. Kind of those worst case scenarios of a procedure either being delayed or canceled. Another measurement we recommend hospitals track is stockouts. When a nurse goes to a shelf to grab an item and it's not there, that's an important KPI. And obviously you want that to be zero, but you're not going to be able to get there unless you measure it. So those are two great examples.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul. Let's see. Next question, we talked about having buy-in and support from the top of the house. This attendee would like to know, what's the importance in having clinical buy-in for a strategic supply chain model? Paul, can I turn to you first for this one?
Yeah, to me, they are hand in glove. You almost can't be successful without it. So it goes back to my point of really understanding your customer, if you will, and typically your clinical staff, your nursing leadership, they have a job to do, and that's take care of their patients. And part of that revolves around availability of supplies and a good working relationship with their supply chain team. Obviously, their needs change, and the better you understand them, and frankly, the better they understand you, your supply chain ability, and frankly, your supply chain limitations, having that constant interaction and dialogue makes for a more successful supply chain strategy. So I think it's about, number one, understanding your customer and their needs, but equally or more important is building that relationship so that both parties can adjust when adjustments are needed, and kind of having that ongoing dialogue going forward to maintain success. Elizabeth, any thoughts on kind of the clinical involvement?
I just say it's the part that I can't see in my job. I don't interact with clinical people like you guys do. But one thing that's impressed me is I know people have had to make decisions in a hurry during the COVID crisis. Gee, we can't get this. We've got to go to this. But it's become really evident that clinical input is needed even then. They've got to know how to use the product. If the product requires a process change or something, somebody's got to train people. So you can't, even in an emergency, you really can't cut clinical out of that. So they have to be built into the model.
Yeah, it's a great example. Any type of product substitution requires clinical input. So that, to me, is a really great example of having that collaboration with your nursing and clinical staff.
Molly, you may be on mute for the next question. Indeed, I was. Thanks, Emma. This next attendee is looking for some actionable advice about the executive sponsorship piece that we had discussed. They asked, you mentioned gaining executive sponsorship as one of the key steps for building a strategic supply chain model. What advice do you have to gain that sponsorship?
Yeah, again, this can be, sure. This one can be, I'll say, a little bit political, but I would make it as matter of fact as possible. I think going up through your organization, whatever that might be, to your boss and your boss's boss, supply chain sometimes reports in through the financial side of the house, maybe through the CFO. Supply chain may report up through the operational side of the house, like the COO. My point being, getting in front of that right executive sponsor, whether it's a CFO, COO, chief nursing officer, chief resource officer, and again, having that sort of vision match. So they have goals and objectives for the health system, and they're probably not thinking about supply chain every day. They kind of think of supply chain like a utility, turning on the water, turning on the lights. It's just always there. It kind of takes care of itself. I think your job is going to your executive sponsor and pointing out how supply chain can be a strategic differentiator to help them help nursing, to help them help their bottom line, to help them with quality. That it may not be an obvious input, but in many, many ways, it has a dynamic influence on every part of the hospital. So if you can emphasize the importance of supply chain and how it enables so many other parts of the health system, I think that executive sponsor is very quickly going to embrace the collaboration, and they can help you navigate other parties and constituents that you may need to support or need support from in the hospital. Again, I see executive sponsors either freeing up resources to assist you, or prioritizing projects like with the IT department or your information technology teams that you may need prioritized. Those are a couple of examples of where an executive sponsor can help you move your strategy faster and wider through the health system. I hope that helps.
You know, Paul, what is the phrase that people say, never waste a good crisis? I certainly think, I mean, people are interested in supply chain. They understand that supply chain is strategic and important. So it probably is a good time for those conversations. On the other hand, I know that there are plenty of organizations that haven't been very strategic about it, just expected to turn on the tap and have the water flow. And probably a lot of folks on the call have gotten yelled at by somebody who didn't understand why the water didn't flow. So clearly we need to continue to educate those executives, but I do think there's a real opportunity to elevate supply chain and get more strategic as a result of everything we've experienced through the pandemic.
So we have just about, I think, 1 or 2 questions left. So thank you, attendees, for all of these great questions you submitted in the Q&A portion of the webinar today. This attendee would like to know, how should hospitals create lists of primary, secondary, and tertiary suppliers to mitigate supply chain disruptions, i.e. natural disaster? Paul or Elizabeth, would you have any guidance to share with this attendee?
Elizabeth, I keep going first, but I'm guessing that that's appropriate on this question, unless you'd like to.
Yeah, I agree that they should, and I'll let you tell them how.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like to some degree this person is offering some really great advice. So number one, great point. You should have sort of a backup plan. And the way I'd go about doing that, or we've recommended the hospitals to do that, is by starting with product categories. So whether you're doing sort of pandemic planning, that there might be a certain type of product beyond PPE, that's sort of given, but is it things with respiratory supplies, or are there lab products or IV solutions? Those types of product categories will then start to highlight those vendors that you'll want to engage with. Your GPOs can play a great role in identifying vendors for you. Your distributors can play a role in identifying second and tertiary options. So I do think starting with those key product categories that are highest priority for you, working through some of the resources you have in the industry, and then again, going back to your clinicians, sometimes they've used different products in different departments or different settings or at different institutions. They might also be a resource for you to identify secondary and tertiary suppliers.
Thanks, Paul. Elizabeth, I want to make sure I check in with you. Anything you would add to that, or anything you'd like to also walk us through on that thought?
No, I'm good.
No? Okay. All right, well, attendees, thank you again for your thoughtful questions today. And also thank you to Paul and Elizabeth once more for such an excellent presentation. And I also want to thank Cardinal Health for sponsoring today's webinar. This is all the time we have for today. So on behalf of Becker's, enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars. Thank you very much.